everyone! Today is another story time. The story time is going to be about relationships, and I'm talking about, you know, with a partner. Potentially marriage as well. I'm going to talk about marriage as well, but yeah, so I don't know how long this video is going to be because I'm just going to wing it, and I feel like, I don't know, it could be a short one, it could be a long one, but yeah. I'm going to do, well, attempt to do a full glam while I'm doing this, but yeah. Let's just say the reason I think I have a bit of experience, the reason I think I have a bit of experience with relationships is because I've dated quite a few guys. And I'm openly sharing this because my parents have always known, my husband knows, so I'm like, well, if anyone else is going to judge me, I don't really care because the only people that matter don't care. So but I just figured maybe this might help because, you know, I have friends, cousins, you know, people who have amazing relationships or marriages or don't, or have gotten divorced or are still single and looking for someone. And I thought maybe if I share some of my experiences, it might, I don't know, like a light bulb might turn on, or inspire you, or it might just be entertaining to listen to. So that's kind of the hope. I'm in my late 30s, gonna be 40 soon, and I dated my first boyfriend at the age of 16, which now I personally, okay, this might not be everyone's popular opinion, I personally do feel like that's way too young. My parents didn't initially know about this, but well, I told my mum when I was 18. Both my mum and my dad, they had a love marriage. They met at college and, you know, they dated and they, you know, they've been married, gosh, over 40 years now, I guess. And so I kind of felt like, you know, I wanted to share that with my mum and see how she reacts. And she did think that I was too young, even at 18, even though she only knew that this information at 18. Now she knows that I dated him when I was 16, but at the time I was like, oh, I just met the guy. But anyway, and then obviously anyone else that I've met, so I'm not going to individually talk about the relationships, what went right or what went wrong. And, you know, at the end of the day, I don't want to sit here and call out people or make it seem like, oh my god, I was a victim every single time or something like that. It's not that. I kind of want to talk to you guys about the things I did wrong and the things that I wish I had changed or worked on or things like that. So let's just say from that relationship, which was my first relationship, I've had other relationships, whether it was in college, whether it was at uni, whether it was a work colleague, whether it was long distance. I've had relationships, and if I now look back at all the things that went wrong in those relationships, if I'm very honest with you, initially started with me. Those were all sort of instigated with me. And the reason I say that is because you end up having childhood traumas. You end up having things that have happened to you that are bad, or, you know, things that you've experienced, whether it's with, you know, at school or family members or whatever. It sort of shapes you into a person, right? And you become a person, like the characters that you have, and then you almost attract the guys that you think are right for you, because that's your frame of mind at that time. So as an example, I used to always like guys who were just like, you know, bad boys, and I mean, I think we all did at some stage, but I kind of thought, oh, that was really attractive, and you know, yeah, like just like these ghetto rowdy boys. Like, I think I always thought that they were cool, and I liked being the little, you know, the timid, like, oh my god, like, you know, they're so controlling, they tell me what to do, and they you know, and I just thought that that was cool, and I thought that's how relationships were meant to be, until I started realizing, no, actually they became too controlling. They would tell me what to do and what not to do and what to study, or who I can hang around with, who I can be friends with, and things like that. And that kind of was a little bit like, wait a second, my own parents don't tell me what to do and what to study and, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, yeah, they do to an extent, but, you know, they tell you because they want what's best for you. Whereas with a partner, when the partner tells you, and you start realizing that it comes from a place of like insecurity or jealousy or just that controlling, possessive, obsessive nature, it's hard. And it's hard to continue to be in a relationship like that because it changes you as a person, right? Like you kind of start feeling like this person that you're not, you know, and you're kind of living because for them and what, you know, to please them or something like that. I was in one relationship where it nearly turned into domestic violence, nearly. And again, you know, I don't know what that feels like, and I'm really sorry if it's triggering for anyone watching, because that is very, very common. It's very common, and I've heard it from, you know, people that I know and care about, how they've been hit or they've been, you know, treated a certain way. And, you know, it's so hard to get out of that because, you know, usually men who are domestic abusers, they're great, or vice versa. It could be the other way around as well. It could be women as well. Don't ever think it's just men. It could be women too, who, you know, can be very abusive, whether it's physically or verbally. And it usually always starts off very subtle, and then once they fully isolate you from people and things around you, that then they start getting, and it's so hard to get out of it, I guess. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying that, you know, that's the kind of guys that I used to be attracted to, and I used to find it so cool, and I used to think that's what relationships were meant to be like. And because I allowed it to happen for so long, and I allowed it to kind of be like, oh, okay, you know, yeah, okay, he can, you know, he can shout at me, he can swear at me, he can do all of these things, and I guess that's normal, or this is how relationships are meant to be. Until you kind of then realize, wait a second, this is not what I see with my parents. And ultimately, sometimes, who do you have as an example? And it usually starts with your own parents. So when you do have parents who have a healthy marriage, you know, it just kind of, you want that for yourself. And I want to have what they have. They can't live without each other, and I think it's really, really nice. But obviously they've learned so many things along the way as well. They were both in their early 20s when they met, and they were in college, you know, they were refugees, they moved countries. So there's so many stages that they went through, and I feel like where they are today in their late 60s, they're that package that I would want, if that makes sense. But growing up with them, you know, question mark. But like, let's just say that's usually where it starts. That's where you get your examples from, right? And then you look at your friends, you know, the kind of guys your friends date, and then you kind of find that inspiring or not inspiring. So you always end up comparing your relationship to other people. So I personally think first advice would be, openly talk about your relationships to people that you really trust. Okay, I think that's really important, because this is where you can also avoid situations like, you know, if there is that kind of abuse about to happen and, you know, you can't tell, but people around you are like, wait a second, this seems like a toxic relationship or something. And I always did that. I would always talk to friends and family about my relationships, you know, initially. And I'm glad that I did, because it helped me sort of get out of some of these relationships and helped me get out of, like, you know, very toxic kind of environments and stuff. So talking about it initially, you know, and the reason I'm saying initially is because you are still growing as a person. And I think with friendships or relationships, I'm talking about like friends, family, whatever, communication is always the most important thing. Communication is always the most important thing. So if you think you can't talk to your partner, then you're going to have to talk to your friends and family and see what can be done. And if there are ways where you can communicate with your partner, you know, and maybe they can help you help your partner, if that makes sense. But yeah, so the kind of relationships that I had always ended up being the same kind of guys that I was dating, with very similar characteristics, you know. I'm talking about personality traits, not looks. I mean, I've dated guys who look very different from each other, all shapes, forms, whatever, name it. For me, I was always attracted to a guy because of their personality. It was never anything else. So yeah, so characteristics, personality traits were very, very similar. And then I realized, wait a second, why am I attracting these kind of guys, and why am I looking for these kind of guys? And I never realized that until my divorce. Until I got divorced and I had therapy is when I realized the things I was doing wrong and the kind of expectations that I had and the kind of standards and boundaries I set in these relationships. And then that made me realize, like, wait a second, like, okay, and I needed to work on the kind of like my behavior, i.e. I realized I was quite controlling in relationships, and I, you know, was always like, oh, it's my way or the highway, or I'm the boss and whatever. I still kind of am, but not in an intimidating way, not in an oh, I'm not going to listen to you, I'm not going to respect your wishes, or I'm not going to validate your feelings, not like that, which I did do in the past. And I think those were really, really big things. Like, if your partner comes to you and tells you that they're bothered about something and you're brushing it off and you kind of just like, ugh, whatever, just shut up, you know, that's never gonna go well, that's never gonna go well, ever, okay? So I feel like that was my biggest thing, looking at me and looking at my characteristics, and you know, just to see if I had any narcissistic traits and stuff. Well, my therapists think that I'm not narcissistic, so that's a good thing. But you know, there are moments that I'm just like, okay, you know what, I need to like reel back, and I need to listen, I need to pay attention, I need to, again, like I said, you know, care about what anybody has to say. And I don't think I did that in previous relationships. I don't think that I ever felt like, you know, it was ever my fault. I would always feel like it's somebody else's fault but me, if that makes sense. And after my divorce, I was single for about 2 years, and during that time, honestly, what I struggled with the most was that I couldn't find anybody. I couldn't get anyone, and the few dates that I went on and stuff, I noticed very, very quickly that their personality was just not what I was looking for. And it was nice to be able to be in that position to kind of choose and see what works for you, right? Because if you've been in several relationships, you kind of know what you like in a relationship and what you don't like in a relationship. And some guys are just great as friends, and some guys are great as partners, but or temporary partners. But then some guys you do look at and you're just like, marriage material. And I know that guys do that with women as well. And I feel like, don't give yourself a list. I feel like honestly, if you have a list of what the person should look like, what the person should have, what the person should do, no, absolutely not. I always think it's so nice when you can grow together. If you look for a guy that just has everything, you know, it's almost like tick boxes, like you tick and you're like, yep. The problem is, well, then if he's apparently so perfect and he's got everything, then where there is no room for growth, and how are you guys going to grow together in the future? Because he's going to be set in his ways, and he's obviously so settled and successful and great. And then what about you? And what if you don't meet his expectations? Because he might have a list as well, right? So I always feel like sometimes go completely blindly. You could just literally see a guy right now. Okay, I'm sorry that I'm talking from my point of view. Obviously this could be the other way around as well, but I'm just saying, if I you know, like if you're meeting a guy and you're just kind of having a conversation with them, it should be an instant thing of just like, oh my god, I really like him, like, you know, he's funny, he's nice and stuff. Not, what do you do for a living, and so where are your parents from, and what city are you from in Sri Lanka, and where do you live here in London, and like, do you have a driving license? Like, you know, those are things that you shouldn't really look for. Yeah, they matter, but those are things that you can easily acquire or do or change, even if you're in that relationship. And I think that's always beautiful, like, you know, and I love those stories where two people get together and then one person financially supports them, and then the other person decides that they want to go back to school, or they want to do their masters, or they want to do something, and they kind of like, you know, encourage each other, work with each other, help each other, and then it gets to the point where that person that you've helped financially or supported throughout your relationship becomes successful, gets a great job, and then just like looks after you, and your life just changes, and you both are just like happy and content, and there is no competition between the two of you. There is no like, you know, I think that's really nice, and I think it's so underrated. Like, I feel like whenever I speak to women, or you know, in the past, like me and my friends, you know, and I used to be one of them, we would literally just be like, oh, I want to date a guy like that, and he should have a job, you know, in finance, 6 foot, like, you know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't really be having those expectations. I think it's beautiful to meet somebody who is kind of just like figuring things out in life, and you're kind of, you know, also maybe figuring things out in life, or maybe you are so set, successful, everything, but the guy that you're looking for can be anybody, absolutely anybody, and you know, that could maybe be your project. Like, you get together, and then you could just slowly by slowly, maybe saying that, I mean, a human being is not a project, but you know what I mean, like where you could just slowly help them, you know, inspire them, and get them to that point of like, you know, what are you gonna do and whatever. And I think that's kind of what happened with my husband and I. Like, we were both in completely different places. Yeah, I was popular on social media or whatever, but I, as an example, wasn't earning the way I do now when I first met him, and I had a different kind of lifestyle. My mindset was a little bit different as well, and you know, we dated. My husband was doing something completely different career-wise as well, and lived in another country, and we were both kind of just like, I'm telling you, at the time I was just like, okay, is this gonna work? Because you live in America, I live in the UK, this is unrealistic. But we made it work despite the busy schedule and everything, and I think that was, you know, really nice. And then we got together, we tried it in Malaysia, we kind of, you know, got married, and then we thought, yeah, like, let's give Malaysia a try, because it was difficult to move to the States at the time. It was difficult for him to move to the UK at the time. So we were kind of like, so what? Let's pack up and move to Malaysia. And I did that. And then, you know, he remembered that, you know, that I did something for him. And then when it came to me just asking him, hey, would you want to move back to the UK? My parents are asking. And he was completely open to it. And even though he was so like comfortable, set, you know, career-wise and everything, I loved that he was kind of just like, yeah, okay, let's go to the UK. And I love that even now, where we're again going through all these kind of new kind of things, because my husband's trying to figure out his career path here in the UK, and you know, it's looking great. He kind of went back and studied something else again, and then now we're at that stage where we're like, are we gonna stay in the UK, or do you think we're gonna move again, like somewhere to another country and try it out, or are we gonna just travel, and you know, or am I gonna quit my job, or what are we gonna do? We're like at that stage at the moment, but I love that we're both kind of just like, yeah, let's sit down and let's discuss and let's plan and let's, you know, vibe off each other. And that, like, the kind of marriage that I have with my husband now is not something that I've ever had. These kind of healthy conversations is something that I've never had before, because I would get really defensive, or my partner would get really defensive, or I would kind of just be like, no, we're not doing this, like, are you crazy? And wouldn't even be open, like, you know, to suggestions or discussions or whatever. And vice versa, like, you know, he, you know, and then you're kind of so like me. That kind of attitude is never going to work in a relationship, because then if it's me, then you should just be on your own, right? Like, if you are going to be in a relationship, it's all about respecting the other person's wishes as well. It's all about respecting what kind of ideas and plans they have, you know, and respecting, yeah, like each other's wishes and each other's time, each other, you know, value each other, things like that. Yeah, I kind of feel like I'm going off on a tangent. I'm just like saying all sorts of things, but I feel like, yeah, that was my second advice, would be to, yeah, to communicate with each other. Not just with other people. Now you're at that stage where you should communicate with each other. Even if you've been married for a really long time, or you've dated for a really long time. You know what, just, I don't know, take a day, put your phones away, okay, like switch it all off, no TV, no nothing, actually sit down and have a conversation and be like, are you happy? You know, and that's a deep question to ask somebody who you think must be happy, but you should just be like, are you happy? Are you happy with me? Are you happy in this relationship? And to be really open about, okay, what are the things, you know, that you like and actually dislike, and what do you think we could do to change things, or change me, or change you and stuff. And I'm not saying like, you know, somebody turning around and saying, I want you to look physically different. That's obviously not going to happen. And, you know, it needs to be realistic changes, but you know, and you need to be able to be open to that and not get defensive, right? Easier said than done. My mom, my dad, and my husband recently had an intervention with me. They sat me down and they were like, so, we noticed this and this and this about you lately, and we don't like it, and you need to change that, kind of thing. And initially, I think they were all so worried to come and tell me because they thought I was just going to snap their heads off. But then I was kind of just like listening to them. I processed it. I took a moment and then just kind of like, you know, thought about it rather than immediately like, oh my God, like it wasn't like that. And that shocked them, by the way. They were kind of just like, oh, like you're taking this really well. And I'm just like, yeah, because I hate when you're in a relationship, or even with parents, I hate when people are biased, when your loved ones are biased and they always think that you're right and you're doing everything correctly and you're perfect and everyone else is wrong but you. No, that's actually really unhealthy, and that's not great. You're not setting a great example. So I've always liked that my mum and my dad, which I didn't before when I was a teenager, and I would go and tell them something and my parents would be like, like, you know, it's almost just like, why, what did you do? Like, you must have done something. And I would just be like, hey, why can't you just be on my side? Like, why can't you support me? And I used to hate it, and I used to hate like telling them stuff. But then after a while, I liked that they are looking at it from every person's point of view to teach me something. Because if my parents think that I was wrong, they're going to tell me that I'm wrong. They're not going to be just like, no, my daughter never did anything wrong. Like, it's not going to be like that. And I think with relationships, it's the same. Like, my husband is extremely supportive and very encouraging. And man, if anybody does anything to me, like, or I know my husband's just like, that's it, that person's enemy number one for me too, kind of thing. But at the same time, my husband will sit me down and be like, I don't think this is good, or I don't think, you know, you should have done this, or I don't think, you know, I feel like this person that you're hanging around with is bringing out the worst in you, or something. And I listen. I don't get so worked up about it anymore. And I don't, you know, I used to, we say, you know, it's almost just like you're always supporting somebody else and saying, no, they're amazing and they're perfect. You don't know them like I do. Like, don't you dare, you know. I don't do that anymore. Now, if my mum or my dad or my husband comes and tells me something about a new friend and says to me, I don't know, I immediately take that advice, and I'm just like, because I always know that when it comes to my husband or my parents, I know that they mean well and they obviously want to protect me, and that's where it comes from, right? So yeah, so I had to work on these things, and that took a really long time, and that definitely took therapy. And I do feel like, you know, therapy is great for those things as well, because at some point you got to question yourself, right? Like, you got to be like, okay, wait, why is this always the same thing happening to me? Rather than always thinking it's everyone else, like at one point you're gonna have to say to yourself like, well, something must be wrong with me. Maybe I did something. It can't always be someone else, right? So yeah, so that is something as well. I should have really planned this. I feel like I don't really have a list of like, so advice number 1, advice number 2, no, you know. Anyway, another one that I would say, I ended up talking for a long time. Another one I would say that's super important. My third advice would definitely be that once you are definitely married, or you've been together for a really long time, that the moment that you do get married, or, you know, both families get involved in decisions or things like that, That's it. You set that standard and the boundary where you do not discuss your marriage with anybody. Anybody. Not your parents, not your friends, not your cousins, nobody. Therapist, yes, but nobody. And I'm telling you, that is the healthiest and the most important lesson I've learned with all my relationships. Like, and now that I am at that place where I'm just like, okay, my husband doesn't do it, I don't do it. We never ask my parents or his mum for any kind of advice unless we really, really want to ask them for something. If we really need their help, we'll go to them. Other than that, we do not take unsolicited advice from anybody because we don't discuss anything with anyone. Any decisions that we make, about anything in our lives, it's always me and my husband. Like, we sit down and we're like, okay, what should we do? And then once we've made a decision together, you know, that's when we go and tell our friends and family, and we're like, oh, by the way, guys, we're doing this, so that nobody changes our minds or whatever. Because the most important thing is, I can't be going to my mum and saying, oh yeah, this and this and this, and then my mum, imagine, says, oh, but I don't think you should do that. And for me, it's just like, I don't care what you think, because my husband and I made that decision. So ultimately it's our decision. And I like that because I've taught my parents this. My parents, you know, don't get involved in anything. And they're always just like, yeah, it's between you two. Like, you two decide this and stuff. And that's only happened because we taught our parents this. We made sure that we never discussed big things with them so that they don't get used to it, you know, because obviously you can't blame them. They do want to know, and they, you know, they feel like they have the experience to kind of advise you. But if you don't discuss things with them, then they're not going to give you unsolicited advice, like I said. And I think that's really, really, really important. That's really helped me because, you know, another thing as well, which is really rare and it's really hard, but trying to live in your own bubble, which I know is hard to do if you all live in the same country or in the same city or even around the corner from each other, or a situation where you might have to live with your in-laws for a little bit until your house is ready or something. It's hard. I'm sorry, you know, if I'm offending anybody here and people think no. I personally believe you should never, as a newly married couple, live with anybody, ever. It doesn't matter. I love my parents. I can live with my parents. I don't have a problem living with my parents. I can't expect my husband to put up with their habits and behavior. Vice versa. My husband would never expect me to live with him and his mum. As much as I get along with my mother-in-law and I love her, I'll get to that in a bit as well. You know, I wouldn't be able to live there as well. And, you know, so that's, I think it's something that sets a little bit of those standards and the boundaries and that healthy marriage life. If it's just the two of you and you're in that little bubble of, like, you know, again, it's just the two of you. Try to be in your own little bubble. And try to kind of not have your in-laws get involved in any decisions that you make. You know, try and live on your own, even if it means spending extra money to rent and pay somebody else's mortgage. Doesn't matter, it's worth the peace of mind. But that, again, that's my personal advice. It doesn't mean that I think everyone should do that, because I know there are so many people who are absolutely happy living with their in-laws and, you know, or with like a big family, and that's fine, and I'm glad. It's just, it's not really worked for me. So I'm basing everything from my own experience, obviously, or even from the stories my friends and family have sort of shared with me, you know, about what went wrong in their relationship. So it's almost like a generalized kind of thing that I'm sort of sharing. Another thing was, once you're married with the in-laws, what had always helped me as well, again, I was married before. This is my second marriage, obviously, so I might have a bit of experience in this, is whenever you have something that bothers you about your in-laws or the family, it's something that you discuss directly with your husband. You never talk about your in-laws or your in-laws family with any of your friends and family. You don't talk negatively. If you have positive things to say, great, but never negatively with anyone else but your husband. And when you speak to your husband, and if there is something that bothers you, or someone is bothering you or expecting something from you, you get your husband to address it. It's never going to be you. It should ideally be him talking to his mum, dad, or cousins, brothers, siblings, whatever. You want to make sure that when you communicate with your husband, you explain it in a way where your husband really respects what you've said and also validates your feelings and understands, and then explains it in a way to his mum, for example, so that it does seem like it's coming from my husband, like, you know, so that my husband can say, look, this was a decision we made together, this is what we don't want or we don't like, or blah blah blah. And even if your mother-in-law, for example, goes nuts and is just like, how dare she, you know, and gets angry about your daughter-in-law, it's then your husband's responsibility to tone it down and come and tell you and be like, oh, you know, like, I think we should do this or we should do that, and not come and be like, oh, my mom said this about you. It's silly, it's childish, and you get nowhere by, you know, communicating things in the wrong way or saying things that are unnecessary. And, you know, I think at the beginning of my marriage, or in my previous marriage, like, you know, it kind of, people always think, especially with the South Asian kind of community, people always think, oh, you're gonna have problems with your mother-in-law, or you're gonna have problems with your sister-in-law. And it doesn't mean that at all, and doesn't always result that way. You could have the best relationship with your mother-in-law and the best relationship with your sister-in-law. First of all, it depends on your own attitude, you know, and secondly, how you portray things, how you set boundaries, how you set standards, and the kind of relationship that you have with them and stuff. I don't have a sister-in-law in this marriage. I don't have one. I just have my mother-in-law, and I have a great relationship with my mother-in-law because I communicate with my mother-in-law. I talk to her, and if she does come and tell me something that she's upset about, which is very rare, she usually goes directly to her son, as it should be, and discusses things with her son. And, you know, if my husband feels like it's something that he needs to communicate with me, he will. Otherwise, he just discusses it with his mum, and I never know about it, and I'd rather not know. But, you know, communication is really, really important. And I remember a few years ago, my mother-in-law was actually upset with something that I did, like something to do with me, and she was very quiet, and she didn't really like speak to me properly the way she normally speaks to me. So I gathered it was something, and typically when I asked my husband, he was just like, oh no, nothing's wrong, no, she's fine, she doesn't have a problem with you. And I'm just like, dude, I know there's something. So I waited, I let her process, I gave her some space, and then I did call her one day, and I was just like, are you upset with me? And when she told me that she is and why she's upset with me, we had a healthy discussion. And then I kind of said to her, look, okay, let's meet halfway. Like, you know, if this is something that bothers you, like, why don't we do this? So then at least both of us are happy, because I can't do this just because you don't like it, kind of thing. And that was it. I'm telling you, it was sorted in that same conversation. And sometimes it's so important to allow somebody to process, give them space, rather than constantly nagging. And I think sometimes us women can be like that. You know, sorry, I'm being sexist here. Like, you know, men can be like that as well. But I'm just saying, like, typically it's seen as if we're the nagging type, and we're always just like, oh my god, like, you know, did you know what happened? Did you see what happened? I swear she did that on purpose. And no, we're not always like that. And we don't, you know, I don't want people to always perceive us women like that, that we are the nagging type. And I know we can be, but I think it comes from obviously an insecure place. It comes from some kind of intimidation. It comes from some kind of trauma in the past. I think it's important to get the right help. And I really, really think that if there are some kind of underlying issues, it needs to be sorted. And this is what I mean by, like, for me, honestly, therapy really, really helped. Some people do this date night thing. Me and my husband used to do that. And after a while, we were kind of just like, no, we're just spending money. For us, it didn't work. London is very expensive, and we just didn't have the time. So for us, date night would be, once a week we decide what day it is going to be, and we're just like, let's do movie night. We put our phones away, we do not look at our phones, we watch a movie, we talk about the movie, or we play a board game, or we sit there and we just have discussions. And that's something that we like to do at least once a week, where we literally spend a good 5 to 6 hours with each other without a phone, and where we talk, you know, and where we discuss things and stuff. And I love my long drives to bridal jobs because I actually speak to my husband on the phone. Like, we would literally be discussing all sorts of things, you know, and it could be, I don't know, a series, or it could be what we want to do, or what we need to buy on our next grocery round. It could be anything, but I think it's so important that you're constantly communicating. I think you should, because your husband or your partner should be like your best friend. That person should be the first person you think of, you know, when you do anything, whether it's good or bad, right? And I think that's important. That sets a very healthy, strong sort of relationship, you know, marriage. So yeah, so I hope I've shared enough stuff there. I know it was all over the place, but for anyone that's single at the moment and it's looking and it's just like really struggling, I do get that the dating world is so different today as opposed to like 10 years ago. You know, you could normally you would meet people at a theater, you know, like at a temple event or a church event, like a religious event, or it would be at a festival, or it would be in a bar, or it would be in a club, or it would be at university or at work or whatever. Whereas now it's so much harder. You know, people usually meet online. I mean, I met my husband via emails. We send each other emails, and that's how it happened, because he watched one of my YouTube videos. And so, you know, and a lot of brides that I get married, you know, ready, sorry. I don't get them married. But you know, the brides that I get ready on their wedding day and stuff, a lot of them, when they share their stories of how they've met their partners, it is through Tinder or like a dating app or speed dating or whatever. So try it all out, try them all out and stuff. I know it requires a lot more energy, but I feel like, well, it's how much you want it. If you really want to find somebody, then you should try all of those things, and again, not be fussy or picky. And I'm not saying it's because you're still single or you're older and you shouldn't be fussy or shouldn't be. No, I think even if you're in your early 20s or whatever, I personally think don't do the list. Don't ever do the list, and don't do this whole, oh, but this is what would work for my parents, or no, you know, since he's doesn't have this career, or since he's this and this, or he doesn't speak Tamil, or whatever it could be, oh, it's not going to really work for my family. No, he's not marrying your family, he's marrying you. I know in our community we always say, look, it's two families coming together. It will be great if they get along, and you want them to get along, but you should always have them, you know, have that distance. You know, it should be like, again, that respect, you know, almost like on an acquaintance professional level. You never want your two families to be like super close. That's always going to cause problems as well. So you want your in-laws to get along, but ideally you want both the families to respect their child's wishes. So if their son or daughter is saying, listen, this is the person that I want to marry because I think it works for me, we're happy, and you know, these are like all the whatever, as parents you should respect it as well, unless you really think that person's just so wrong for your child for whatever reasons and stuff. Then again, communicate, discuss it. But I do think that yeah, like, I just completely forgot what I was saying. But if you're single, just kind of like put yourself out there and start dating people, and you know, try different races. I mean, I did. The 2 years that I was single and I couldn't find anybody, I did go on dates with, you know, different ethnicities, and I had a great time and great conversations, but it just wasn't really for me. I really wanted to date a Tamil guy personally, and I'm glad I found one. But if I did hit it off with somebody from a different, you know, kind of background, I'm pretty sure my parents would have still been open to it, and they would have just been like, well, as long as you're happy. So it doesn't sometimes mean, I know sometimes people say, oh, you know, relationships will only work, or you will only get on, or things will only be okay if it's from the same culture. No. You could be marrying somebody from the same, you know, place you're from, and the marriage could still not work out. So you can't ever say that, you know, and I think Tamil parents sometimes have that mentality, right? They're just like, oh, because he's Tamil, he'll never leave you. No, he should leave you if he's not happy with you, or vice versa. Like if you guys have major marital problems, there should be an option of like not wanting to be in this marriage anymore. You should never be stuck with somebody just because you think, oh my God, what would society say? And then spend the rest of your life being in an unhappy marriage or relationship. No, like, but at the same time, obviously don't jump ships every single time, because that's gonna basically, I mean, who cares what other people say? But if you do that though, it just means that you're gonna have commitment issues naturally, and you're never gonna be entirely satisfied with anyone that you date, because you're always going to find faults in them and stuff. Oh my God, I could sit here and talk forever about relationships and the do's and the don'ts, because I have that much experience. And yeah, so I'm gonna stop. I managed to do a full glam for you guys. I hope this wasn't too random and all over the place. I really hope so, and I hope that you picked up something, at least one good thing, or something positive, or something that you might be able to apply to your own lives, or, you know, be able to share this video with somebody else that you think might need it or should watch it and stuff. You know, yeah, things can be good. You could have a great relationship and a great marriage, but again, there are so many things to consider, and it also depends on you, not just your other half, if that makes sense. So there are so many things I would personally advise. That's about it. Until next time, leave me feedback and do share your stories like last time as well.